Please use headphones for the best effect. Part 1. The Weight of Krieg. Title: The Emperor's Razor. The air was thick with the stench of promethium and decay. The ground, a churned morass of craters and corpses, trembled under the ceaseless barrage. Sergeant Lukas of the 597th Krieg Regiment, face masked in the cold steel of his rebreather, crouched in the trench. A vox crackle cut through the din. "Lukas, sit rep." "Holding, sir, barely." His gloved fingers tightened on his laser gun, its barrel hot to the touch. A fresh wave of orcs, their green hides smeared with gore, surged over the no-man's land. A guttural battle cry ripped from Lukas's throat as he unleashed another volley, mowing down the closest brutes. The Kriegers were known for their stoicism, their unwavering devotion to the God Emperor, but even their iron discipline had limits. Lukas had seen too many brothers fall, their bodies torn apart by orc choppas or blown to pieces by crude grenades. He was weary, not of the fighting, but of the endless dying. A flash of movement caught his eye. A hulking orc knob, its crude power armor adorned with grotesque trophies, bellowed a challenge. Lukas, fueled by adrenaline and a grim determination, leapt from the trench, his bayonet glinting in the hellish light. The clash was brutal, a whirlwind of steel and rage. The knob's choppa whistled past Lukas's head, carving a furrow in his helmet. He countered with a thrust piercing the orc's thick hide. The creature roared in pain, its eyes filled with savage fury. Lukas braced himself, knowing this could be his end. But he was a Krieger, bred for war, and he would not yield. He twisted the bayonet, feeling the orc's lifeblood seep onto his gauntlet. With a final desperate effort, he shoved the gargantuan foe backwards. The knob stumbled, its momentum carrying it over the edge of a shell crater. Lukas watched as the creature disappeared into the gloom, its death cry swallowed by the roar of battle. He stood there panting, his heart pounding in his chest. He had survived another day. But for how much longer? The war seemed endless, a meat grinder that devoured lives without mercy. The vox crackled again. "Lukas, report." "Knob down, sir," he replied, his voice a rasp. "But the orcs keep coming." "Then keep fighting, Sergeant. For the Emperor." Lukas nodded grimly, raising his laser gun once more. The Kriegers would fight on, as they always had, until victory or death. There was no other way. Part 2. Echoes of the Past. The vox crackled again, this time a different voice, sharper, more authoritative. "Sergeant Lukas, this is Lieutenant Braun. We're pulling back. Fall back to grid Epsilon 9. Reinforcements are inbound." Lukas barked the order down the line, a wave of relief washing over him. They had held, against all odds, but the cost had been steep. He scanned the trench, noting the empty spaces where brothers once stood. The retreat was a staggered dance of covering fire and desperate sprints. Lukas, ever vigilant, brought up the rear, his laser gun spitting death at any orc foolish enough to give chase. They reached grid Epsilon 9, a blasted ruin of ferrocrete and twisted metal. The reinforcements, fresh-faced Kriegers from the 83rd, were already digging in. Lukas reported to their commander, a grizzled veteran named Captain Steiner, and received his new orders. "Sergeant Lukas, you and your men are to hold this flank. Expect heavy resistance. The enemy will not give up this ground easily." Lukas nodded, his face a mask of grim determination. He gathered his surviving squad, a mere handful of battle-hardened veterans, and set about fortifying their position. As darkness fell, the orcs renewed their assault. They came in waves, their crude weapons blazing, their war cries echoing through the night. The Kriegers met them with disciplined fire. their lasguns cutting bloody swaths through the enemy ranks. Lukas fought like a man possessed, his every movement honed by years of warfare. He moved from position to position, encouraging his men, directing their fire, plugging gaps in the defense. In the heat of battle, a memory surfaced, a fleeting image from his childhood on Kreig. He saw himself as a young boy, training in the harsh, unforgiving environment of his homeworld. He remembered the stern faces of his instructors, the endless drills, the constant indoctrination. He had been raised for this, for war, for death. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, replaced by the grim reality of the present. An orc, its face twisted in a rictus of hate, charged towards him, its choppa raised high. Lukas sidestepped the clumsy blow and drove his bayonet into the creature's chest. The orc gurgled, its lifeblood staining Lukas's armor. He pulled the bayonet free, a cold satisfaction filling him. He was a Krieger, and this was his purpose. The battle raged on, a symphony of violence and destruction. But the Kriegers held firm, their resolve unbroken. They would fight, and they would die for the Emperor. As dawn approached, the orc attacks began to falter. Their numbers dwindled, their morale broken. The Kriegers, battered but unbowed, had prevailed once again. Lukas surveyed the battlefield, the ground littered with the bodies of friend and foe alike. The stench of death hung heavy in the air. He felt a pang of sadness for his fallen brothers, but there was no time for mourning. The war was far from over. He turned to his men, their faces etched with exhaustion and grim satisfaction. "We held," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "For the Emperor." A ragged cheer rose from the survivors, a testament to their unwavering spirit. They were Kriegers, and they would fight on, until the bitter end. Part 3. The Whispering Warp. The lull in the fighting was a brief respite, a chance to tend to the wounded, replenish ammunition, and fortify their defenses. Lukas, his body aching, his mind numb with fatigue, sought a moment of solitude. He found a crumbling alcove, away from the noise and chaos of the battlefield. He removed his helmet, revealing a face etched with the scars of countless battles. He closed his eyes, taking deep breaths, trying to calm his racing heart. In the silence, he heard a whisper, a faint echo from the depths of his soul. It was a voice he had heard before, a haunting melody that spoke of darkness and despair. He recognized it as the insidious touch of the warp, the chaotic realm that lay beyond the veil of reality. The Kriegers were taught to fear and despise the warp, to shun its corrupting influence. But Lukas had always felt a strange attraction to it, a morbid curiosity that he couldn't explain. He had seen its power firsthand, witnessed its ability to twist and distort the minds of men. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. It spoke of secrets, of hidden truths, of forbidden knowledge. Lukas tried to resist, to block it out, but the voice was too strong, too alluring. He opened his eyes, his vision blurring. He saw fleeting images, flashes of light and shadow. He heard whispers of names, of places, of events long past. It was a glimpse into the warp, a terrifying and exhilarating experience. The vision faded, leaving Lukas shaken and disoriented. He stumbled back to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. He had seen something that he couldn't explain. He returned to his squad, his mind racing. He tried to focus on the task at hand, but the whispers continued to haunt him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had been touched by something dark, something dangerous. As the day wore on, Lukas's unease grew. He noticed a change in his men, a subtle shift in their demeanor. They were more withdrawn, more secretive. Their eyes held a haunted look, as if they had seen something they couldn't comprehend. Lukas knew that the warp was at work, its tendrils reaching out to corrupt and consume. He had to do something to protect his men from its insidious influence. But what could he do? He was just a sergeant, a cog in the vast machine of the Imperium. He sought out Captain Steiner, hoping to find answers. But the captain was preoccupied with the ongoing battle, his attention focused on the tactical situation. Lukas hesitated, unsure whether to share his concerns. In the end, he decided to keep his silence. He didn't want to be seen as weak, as susceptible to the warp's influence. He would have to face this challenge alone to protect his men and his own sanity. As darkness fell, Lukas stood on the ramparts, gazing out at the desolate landscape. The air was thick with the stench of death and decay. The whispers of the warp continued to echo in his mind, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. He knew that a storm was coming, a storm that would test the Kreigers' resolve to the breaking point. He could only hope that they were strong enough to withstand it. Final part: the Emperor's Razor. The storm broke with the fury of a demon unleashed. The orcs, reinforced and reinvigorated, launched a massive assault under the cover of a warp-induced thunderstorm. The sky crackled with unnatural lightning, and the air throbbed with the malevolent energy of the immaterium. Lukas and his men fought with the ferocity of cornered animals. They repelled wave after wave of orcs, their lasguns glowing red-hot, their bayonets dripping with xenos blood. But the enemy seemed endless, their numbers swelling with every passing moment. The warp's influence grew stronger, twisting the battlefield into a nightmarish landscape. Shadows danced in the corners of Lukas's vision, and the whispers in his mind became a deafening chorus. He fought on, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate will to survive. In the midst of the chaos, a figure emerged from the swirling warp storm. It was a hulking orc warboss, its armor adorned with the skulls of fallen foes. It wielded a massive power claw, its energy field crackling with unholy power. The warboss roared a challenge, its voice a guttural bellow that shook the very ground. Lukas, recognizing the threat, rallied his men. They formed a shield wall, their lasguns blazing, their bayonets gleaming in the unnatural light. The warboss charged, its claw tearing through the Kriegers' ranks. Lukas met the beast head-on, his lasgun spitting defiance. The two clashed in a whirlwind of steel and energy, their blows echoing like thunder. Lukas was outmatched, his strength waning, his armor battered and broken. But he refused to yield. He fought with the fury of a dying star, his every strike infused with the righteous wrath of the Emperor. In a final desperate gamble, Lukas fainted low, drawing the warboss's attention. As the creature lunged, Lukas thrust his bayonet upwards, piercing the gap in its armor. The blade found its mark, plunging deep into the orc's heart. The warboss roared in agony, its energy field flickering and dying. It stumbled backwards, its massive body collapsing in a heap. A cheer erupted from the Kreigers, their morale soaring. With their leader slain, the orc attack faltered. The warp storm began to dissipate, its power waning. The Kriegers, battered but unbroken, had once again triumphed over the forces of chaos. In the aftermath of the battle, Lukas stood amidst the wreckage, his body aching, his spirit weary. He had faced the darkness within himself and emerged victorious. But he knew that the war was far from over. The warp would always be there, waiting to claim the unwary. He looked up at the sky, the storm clouds parting to reveal a sliver of sunlight. He offered a silent prayer to the Emperor, thanking him for his protection. Then he turned to his men, their faces etched with the scars of battle. "We have survived," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "For the Emperor." The Kriegers raised their weapons in salute, their voices joining in a chorus of defiance. They were the Emperor's razor, and they would fight on until the bitter end, the end. I hope you enjoyed the story. Like and subscribe for more.